Okay, thank you everyone. Welcome to the Oxford Cambridge Growth Pavilion for day two. I always start these a minute early because it gives me a chance to ramble a bit before I introduce my speakers. So I guess first, thank you for coming. Secondly, I guess reflections on day one. Some of us have been here a little bit and have had some of the banter already and some of the feedback. So everyone really excited about the potential Oxford Cambridge Growth Corridor. But some of the feedback we've had from day one actually is it genuinely real? Is it really going to happen? And I've heard some panelists go, oh, come on, we've got a whole pavilion now and we've got, government support and all this sort of thing. And I think that reflects the fact that everybody knows there's an opportunity. We've known the opportunity for a long, long time. And now we really need to get that common belief, the common understanding, and get everyone aligned to doing that. And a lot of the people you'll see today, Minister, are people who are part of that journey as well. So particularly delighted that Minister Pinnicook has come along to talk to us today, because it's part of that building confidence that we really are going now, we're really getting along, and I'll hand it straight over to you.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Andy, for that introduction. And it's really fantastic to be here today and to have the opportunity to speak about the Oxcam Growth Corridor, which we believe, and I'm sure you believe, and I won't need to labour the point too much because it does represent, for all the reasons everyone in this room will know, an incredible opportunity for growth in this country. Oxford and Cambridge, obviously, home to two of the best universities in the world. The region is a globally renowned hub for innovation, for science and technology firms, and we want to build on that. And I'm absolutely delighted that Patrick Vallance has been appointed as the champion for the Growth Corridor, has really hit the ground running over recent months in pulling all of government together, and Joe will say a bit more about how government is working on this particular initiative, but pulling the whole of government together to support an ambitious plan for growth for the whole region, and thereby supporting economic growth across the whole country, which is this government's number one mission. The work of my department is absolutely central to that agenda. You will all know, discussed it already this morning, some of the really bold measures we've taken to overhaul the national planning policy framework, to streamline the delivery of housing and infrastructure across the country. We're taking the planning and infrastructure bill through Parliament as we speak, and there is more to come. But in terms of our focus on Cambridge and Oxford, I just want to set out a bit of what we're doing to build on what people already know, but to give you a sense of what's taking place and what's to come. In Greater Cambridge, and I do say Greater Cambridge because it's the city, but also its environs, we've taken action to support nationally significant growth, and we are very, very clear it is nationally significant growth, and therefore central government has a really, really key role to play in bringing that forward. And we're building, as I said, from a position of strength as to the strengths of the city that are already there. It is one of the most intensive science and technological clusters in the world relative to its population density, but it is held back in any number of ways in terms of transport constraints, the lack of housing, and particularly affordable housing. We've appointed Peter Freeman to take forward through the Cambridge Growth Company measures as to how we can unlock and accelerate development in this area. We have, as a department, already in the short term, take a series of initiatives that have enabled nearly 10,000 homes and 500,000 square feet of commercial space and a new cancer research hospital to be giving planning permission. These were previously blocked because of water constraints, but we've been unable, working in a slightly different way, again, which Joe will touch on, I'm sure, across government to ensure these are unblocked. And it's important that we build on those interim measures with a long-term plan for growth in the city, and you'll hear more about that in the coming months. And then similarly in Oxford, more recently and slightly behind Cambridge in this respect, but I'm sure we'll catch up. We're also taking forward ambitious plans, bringing together central and local government with a plan for economic growth, again across the city, but its surrounding areas, and tying that in together. And I'm absolutely delighted, I can see him here, that Neil Coleman has agreed to chair the Oxford Growth Commission. Neil, I don't need to tell the people in this room, has a proven track record in delivering growth and regeneration projects at really big scale, and I'm really excited to see what he'll bring forward in the region. Like the Cambridge Growth Company, the Oxford Growth Commission is focused on identifying an initial set of priorities that will maximise the impact, the benefits of growth in the local area, as well as to the UK, and capitalising on the wider work that we will be undertaking through the corridor. So that's a little bit about the two poles, if you like, of the corridor. There's obviously a lot in between. We'll have more to say on that in the months to come. But I just want to sort of end by making clear to Andy's initial sort of challenge: is government serious? Government is deadly serious about making this happening. It is going to happen. The Prime Minister has made clear that this government's number one priority, as I've said, is economic growth. The corridor is at the heart of that agenda. We really do think this can be Europe's answer to Silicon Valley if we get it right. But I appreciate, and you'll want to know, and we can talk about the more detail, that governments have spoken about intervention in this area for a long time. But I would sort of finish on saying, judge us by our actions at the end of this Parliament. You will see we are deadly serious, and we are going to bring forward very ambitious, nationally significant growth in the corridor in Oxford and Cambridge. And today is my opportunity. I'm glad to have it to make clear that level of ambition that government is determined to take forward.
Spot on. Thank you. Now, are you rushing off, or are you going to take a question?
No, I'll sit and. I'm
sit?
not going to hear from. I'll sit and hear for a bit. I think
Sit for a bit.
my Sherpas will tell me if I need to leave.
Excellent. So then, does anybody have one burning question, or should we move on to the panel? Fantastic that you're going to join our panel as well. It'll get fun. So next speaker I'm going to ask is Karen Holford, Vice Chancellor of Cranfield University. You've been on the long journey with me as well. What to you is exciting about the region, and what's your hopes for the next 10, 20, 30 years?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Well, within 30 years, I hope to retire. But my hopes for the region are very clear. So I came to the region 3.5 years ago, and to be honest, I was in a hurry for progress, and I embraced the Oxford-Cambridge region, and I was quite frustrated at the pace of change. Now I see it's different now. The pace of change is quicker. There's the real commitment from government, and it's all about partnership, isn't it? So it's all about making those partnerships real. And in fact, I'll embarrass Andy now, but I need to say this. It was when Andy got involved that I could really see that there was somebody here who I could work with who shared my same ambitions for the region. So our ambitions for the region is, it's a fantastic region. It has so many advantages and skills all over the place, and a useful graphic rather than me trying to remember everything. I'd like you all to look at the graphic at some point at the back, because this is the technical strengths of the region. So we know about Cambridge with its life sciences strengths. That's there, and that's pulling in, great scientists from all over the world. But many of you will not know about the very, very special university at the heart of the arc, which is Cranfield University, which is the university which is specialist in science, technology and management. It's one of the universities that drives economic growth in the UK as it is, because we take absolutely brilliant ideas and turn them into practice that industry can use. And that's why we've got industry like Rolls-Royce, Airbus, all sorts of people actually hosted at our site. The Oxford-Cambridge Supercluster Board is hosted at our site, and we are proud to be kind of driving that economic growth. So I've got huge ambition that the region will become famous for driving the science, superpower ambitions of the UK, and for driving that innovation that we know we've got in the UK. We've got some brilliant scientists, engineers. I've got countless examples. I heard of an example last week of one of our spin-out companies working with Imperial College London and the European Space Agency to grow food in space. So it's these brilliant ideas that are coming forward, and that they need investment. They need, that ambition of all of us to make those companies rise with us. So, yeah, thank you, Andy. I can come back again, but that's enough for me.
No, thanks, Karen. And I guess why did I get involved? It was the science and technology opportunity. I am basically a scientist. The thought of originally bringing Oxford to Cambridge together was fantastic. And then hearing from Karen about the opportunities in the centre of the region, it's just bursting with innovation. And the short-term measures we'll take through Neil and Peter to get that short-term innovation sorted out. Get East West Rail built and build on that is really important. So Gareth, turning to you from the investor perspective, hopefully a bit more cynical, but invested already very heavily in the region. How do you respond to that? Is it science and technology for you? What are you doing at the moment, and what do you see as the future for the corridor?
Well, I don't feel cynical. I feel very, very positive, and I suppose that it's sharing a stage with Matthew and then saying positive things about what the government has done from a planning perspective is probably an easy thing to do. So for conditions that we want to see to invest, we do want to see a bit of boring, stable, predictable, incremental change of government in a positive direction. And it feels like we are seeing that from the current government. What we want to do as a business with just over 20 million square feet across many sectors within the UK, within that, we have a science and technology portfolio that is a pipeline of 4 million square feet. And to invest in that, what we want to see economic growth, we want to see jobs growth attached to that economic growth, and then we have a need for real estate that's falling out the back end of that. We think that there's a fundamental change to the UK economy that's coming aligned with science and technology because of the ageing population, because of the climate crisis, and because of the rise in AI. It's been difficult to do that post-COVID. There are some things that have got in our way. There's been some really positive change. We got planning consent for something in Oxford last night, so a very recent and live example of how government helped from local government through to national government, because the Environment Agency wanted to have a grampian condition on us not able to occupy a building because Thames Water haven't invested in sewage capacity. Local to national government got involved and have now stopped that condition happening, so our planning consent to be granted, and then we can invest the 250 million pounds in this scheme. And that's a really good sort of live example of how government has made some good incremental changes. But we do want to see more of them. When we think about our continued investment in the growth corridor, the two questions that businesses ask us when they come to kind of take space from us, the first one is about their access to capital, and then the second one is about their access to talent. And that access to talent is a real constraint around housing across the ARC. So you've mentioned transport already. There's things that we would like to see a little bit more boldness and pace around, like the Cowley branch line, like East West Rail, and then residential planning consents happening across the corridor. So there's some things where we'd like to see the government kind of go a little bit faster and be a little bit more supportive, despite the very positive progress that has been made in the last 10 months.
That's great, thanks Gareth. And actually the session before this one was about skills and how we actually make sure that we have the skills for the region, and actually how we make sure as many as possible come from our existing communities, both through the 18 to 21 year olds, but also in that slightly older age range. How do we retrain people so they can take advantage of the new requirements in areas like digital? But we'll come back to that discussion in due course. So Joe, I started the session, perhaps negatively when I've got a miss here, is we've been waiting a long time, and we finally got lots of things happening. But we have a bunch of initiatives now. So we have Oxford and Cambridge with their own leaders. We have CAVS units set up looking across the whole corridor. And then we have the local growth plans from local authorities or combined authorities in place. How do you make sure we all stay focused and aligned moving forward so that we aren't working at cross purposes?
Yeah, and it's a really, really important question. And first of all, I should say, my name's Joanna Keeve. For those of you I don't know, I'm Director General for Regeneration, Housing and Planning at MHCLG. And the way that I've been involved in the Oxford to Cambridge Growth Corridor, as Matthew said, the focus has been on growth, and that's been a really, really key focus of this government. But I think what is different about the way that we are approaching the Oxcam corridor is that we want to do things very differently in the way that we join up in government, both in terms of how we join up across Whitehall, but also how we join up between central, local, regional government. So I think it's probably fair to say that when this government came in July last year, I think they were very determined, Matthew, correct me if I'm wrong, to try and break down some of these silos in government, which they'd seen from the outside. So we were given lots of encouragement as the civil service to try and approach this issue in a different way and try and adopt a more sort of holistic and joined up approach across government. So what we're trying to do is adopt a kind of mission-based approach to the Oxcam corridor. It's not really about departments pursuing their own objectives in a narrow way. It's about trying to contribute to growth as a holistic objective across the whole corridor. And as Matthew said, Patrick Vallance has established a sort of cross-government group, which is called the Ministerial Delivery Group, which brings together ministers from all the relevant departments, so Treasury, DBT, MHCLG, of course, Transport, DESNES, DEFRA, etc. And we've created a new team of civil servants which is completely cross-government. So it's not based in one department, it's a cross-government team. It reports jointly to CAB and then to me and Jess Glover, who is the DG for growth in the Treasury. So what we're trying to do is work really, really differently and sort of hardwire what we're trying to achieve into the way that all government responsibilities are pursued. So it's not an add-on, it's completely hardwired in. The other thing I just wanted to pick up on briefly was you mentioned skills, Andy, and I think that is a really sort of important point going across everything that we're trying to achieve, both on the 1.5 million homes, but also some of these growth objectives locally. And the recent announcement of the £600 million going into construction skills, I think hopefully will be really, really welcome. We must, though, as other panel members have said, really deliver on this, because the key will be trying to work with the sector to get the skills in the right place and in the right kind of sub-skills, if you like, to deliver on what business wants. And so we're setting up this kind of joint government business approach to delivering on all of that. And it's quite notable that the business sector have also put a lot of money behind this. They've put 140 million of their own money behind this. So they're really keen to get this going. So I'll pause there, but that's I just wanted to sort of set that out so people understand how we're trying to work really differently on this project.
Fantastic. And so finally, Cav, who leads the Oxford-Cambridge Growth Corridor team and government. Now, Cav has only been in role a few weeks, which gives him no excuse not to know all the answers, because previously he was the SRO for East West Rail. So, Cav, it'd be great to know, but in your first few weeks, what have you been setting up? How are you making sure we get that alignment? How do you identify the priorities?
So, as you say, for 7 years I was SRO for East West Rail, so I've been around this space for a while. And I was very excited about new government, and I told my team before Christmas, I think we've had our last existential crisis as East West Rail. This is going to happen. Now we've got to face the traditional delivery crises of being on time and on budget, which come to major projects. So I was really excited about that. I was really excited about the planning reform, which I reckon could take, I don't know if David's here, but a year or more off the delivery of that programme in terms of our ability to do things differently and more swiftly. So I was really excited about this year, and then this job came up, and I thought, well, I'm even more excited about that. So 6 weeks in, it feels different. I have a fantastic team from across government, and we are looking, we're trying to sort of fix the plumbing behind the scenes and help people solve problems. This will be delivered by the corridor, not by government. Government is an enabler, but it's about unleashing that potential and getting the stuff out the way. And so our job is really to, where are the blocks, who needs to talk to whom to unblock that, and they'll be the ones that solve that, not us, but we can help bring them together or spot that or give a couple of ideas. We're still sort of finding our feet, building relationships. It's been a fantastic couple of days here, sort of meeting people, and I've got lots of trips now planned to go and see other bits of the corridor. But we're here really, if there's a problem, let us know and we will try and help you find where in government you need to go or take advantage of some of the changes coming, which I don't think the impact of yet is still fully understood in terms of what some of the opportunities are. And it's really important that we shine light on it and help people understand that things will be different. But different is change, and different means learning new skills, and people will be quite vested in the old ways of doing things, and actually doing things new in different ways, more exciting but more risky, and requires a bit of bravery. And so I think part of our job is to give people confidence to take that leap and do things a bit differently in different ways. And for me, probably the number one thing I would say when it comes to planning reform is I think the changes are brilliant. They don't take away the need to engage people. So the idea that you can just sort of ride roughshod over things, that won't work. But you don't need to engage them in a big bureaucratic way we used to. There can be different ways of achieving that. So again, one of the things that's come up a lot over the last 24, 40 hours is the power of talking, the power of engagement. Pick up the phone, problem solve together, and it's amazing what can be done. And Alice has been talking about the magic wand of, if you had a magic wand and what could you wave it at to get something out of the way. Do that thought experiment. Often you find you can do it. And if you can't do it, come and talk to us and we'll work out whether we can help you do it as well.
I think what I've heard in that first round of answers is actually something I've noted, the sort of culture change, is it's problem-solving mode. We saw it a little bit with Peter Freeman in the previous incarnation before this administration came in. But the way you progress that more and just bringing people together to have pragmatic, sensible conversations whilst ensuring that we take into account the needs of the communities as well. That's the big thing that's changed for me. You called it pace, Karen. I think it's more people actually doing real things that business recognised. Bringing things together, identifying problems, finding ways to solve them jointly is really important.
Yeah.
So
And I think just on that point,
yeah,
I think it is worth stressing, because there was a scenario here which sort of speaks to what the previous government, we could have just said we're going to go out for 3 or 4 years and comprehensively, spatially plan the whole framework and everyone must wait and see what happens. But we are taking that pragmatic approach. We're looking at a series of growth supporting interventions and through these new mechanisms, the new partnership working with both local government and other government bodies, arms length bodies, trying to bring everyone together and stitch, the local planning side together with all of the other stuff that's happening. But it is a pragmatic approach because time is of the essence.
I love that. I am going to come back to the audience questions in a minute, but I'm going to finish with Gareth, my first round 1, part B, and you don't know about this one. So you've heard all that, and from a business perspective, that's great because business work in those 1, 3, 5 year timeframes. Investors work in the sort of longer, from what I've heard, 10, 15, longer time. What you've heard, does that work for you? Does that give you the confidence to build in a scheme which may not come along for 10, 15 years' time, and for other investors in the room as well?
Yes, it does give us the confidence. So when we would look at the market, we would look at 4 things. We'd look at capital markets, occupational markets, and then we'll look at our sort of supply chain ability to deliver that, and then we look at policy and regulation. When we look across those kind of 4 things for Oxcam at the moment, if I'm honest, occupational demand could be a little bit deeper and more robust. That's one of the things that has probably not performed as people expected over the last 2 to 3 years. People thought it would be very strong in terms of levels of active demand, and it's not quite as strong as people expected. When we look at the capital markets side, the capital markets have started to defrost, which allows businesses like ours to recycle capital to then invest more once business plans are complete. It would be nice if that defrosting happened a little more quickly with base rates falling and things like that. Our supply chain is always super keen to engage, and the supply chain is amazingly responsive. I hear the stuff around skills and construction capacity, and that probably is a little bit of a concern there, and insolvency is probably a bit of a concern for some elements of the supply chain. And policy and regulation is all going in the right direction, but I do want to mention a couple of things that I'm a little bit concerned about for that ability to invest over the next few years. And Matthew talked about you could have gone away and kind of done a plan for everything and then done a grand reveal in 4 years' time, but people can't wait that long. There's a couple of things that I'm concerned about that are a downside risk for our investment. I suppose the first thing is to pick up on some good work done by Public First for the supercluster around the potential for the GVA and the jobs and homes that are needed to achieve that GVA. And that's where we get a dislocation between aspirations from forecasts created by us with Public First versus central government versus local government. And you can see that tension playing out through the Cambridge local plan at the moment as to what those forecasts are going to be and what that means for land being allocated. So that's kind of concern number 1. It's a bit similar in Oxford too. And then concern number 2 would be then the governance regime that sits around that. So there's talk of reorganisation of governance, potential for a development corporation potentially in Cambridge, some restructuring of local and kind of county level government within Oxfordshire, and those 2 things around agreement of what we're aiming at in terms of jobs and homes, and then the structures that you go through to get the approvals to do what you need to do to invest. They're things where I think there's a little bit of downside risk for our appetite for investment, so we're going to be watching those quite carefully to hope that they don't drag on and then affect that competition for cash internally for investment in other areas.
Yeah, and that's played out with Neil, almost having a one-to conversation with Neil here. So in the Cambridge area, we recognised a few years ago, I used to find you involved in some of this early work, about we were seeing ONS data which wasn't reflecting what we saw on the ground. And so we commissioned some work through Cambridge University to look at what the real growth was. And everyone said, well, did they do it in a very clever way? No, they basically went down to people's spreadsheets, they phoned them up, and they asked them, how many people do you employ this year, next year, how did it all come together? And built up a much more dynamic picture of the growth and change in growth in Cambridge over a period of time, and had the common sense of always engaging local government in that as well, so they could see how that changed. And it's a similar approach that we used for the 78 billion report, is what's the real growth, how's it really working? And I think perhaps I'm describing it a different way, is a lot of decisions that we see being taken are based on ONS data, and they have to follow whatever ONS say. And yet, if you continue to do that, and all your regulation follows things that come through ONS, it's going to create this disconnect between effectively the opportunity and what it's saying. I'm not expecting the answers to that, but that's how we've gone, and we decided to do that across the whole of the region now. So we're going to have a much more dynamic view of the region, and we'll definitely partner again with the local government and central government partners so that we can all test that. Again, it's the problem solving. Everyone works on it together. Is it real? Is it different from the OS data? How do you tie the two together? So I'm going to open the floor to questions. Go ahead. Is this microphone live?
Thank you, Andy. Matthew, I'm promoting a new garden village within the Oxcam Arc in Huntingdon, and one of the things that there's many challenges, but one of the areas I think that the government could help is unlocking the grid along the Arc corridor, because the two DNOs that actually operate, there's a quite a large gap in between their areas of operation, because a lot of the A1 corridor fits in between the two. We experience issues there, but I can see that a lot of the growth corridor is now. I've tried to look at how that might be possible to help by trying to contact someone like GB Energy, and to be honest, I haven't been able to get anywhere because I thought maybe they would be the kind of organisation that could look at that corridor because of its importance, and they may be able to provide some investment to try and actually find a way in which that could be made happen, open up an awful lot of opportunities, but actually be able to get that money back by investment, because clearly it's a major growth area. Is there anything that you guys can do to try and help that position, because the grid is massively a problem and it will really inhibit the growth of the Oxcam, and it's a problem because of the DNOs being either side of it, and it's not their area in many ways, and we're experiencing that on my garden village.
I would take them. I think the probably best thing to say about that, and I'm tempted to, from previous shadow roles, stray into discussion of DNOs, but I'll avoid that and say that maybe Cav and Joe might take away the specific part of the corridor you're talking about. But I think that speaks to, again, which has already been touched upon, through this and with Patrick as the lead and as the champion, but through the ministerial group. And we have incredibly regular meetings with ministers from DESNES, DFT, DEFRA, everyone who is involved in some way and needs to get behind delivery of the project, and where constraints are at play. They are around the table, and officials, as we've heard, are working across government. So all of those constraints we are looking to solve. And I think that's where it comes, again, back to the sort of pragmatism point. We're looking, and we'll be very clear about what they are in due course, but we've looked at what are the sort of most impactful growth interventions that can be made along the corridor, and what do we need to unblock them. And it might be grid, it might be a transport solution, it might be water constraints on DEFRA's part, etc. And all those ministers and all those departments coming together to look to unblock those in a really pragmatic and speedy way. So we can certainly take away what the particular issue with the grid, but I know from conversations with DESNES ministers they're really seized about that. And then more broadly, it's just worth me mentioning, because I've been on my feet for, I think it's 7 hours yesterday doing it line by line. Measures in the planning infrastructure bill, just in general, will help speed up the delivery of critical energy infrastructure, including the grid, and we're making that a lot easier over the long term through measures in that bill as well.
That's great, and just a plug for the Cambridge and Peterborough Combined Authority. Feeding issues up through them is also useful, and making sure you've got the links into either the local authorities or combined authorities, because obviously they have the people on the ground. And I just know that they were interested in power. I was used to sit on GCP City Deal, who actually came up with their own solution to power at the time through problem solving, and actually the city deals were another mechanism where we brought cross-departmental support in to do things. So there are ways. It's trying to make sure the right things get escalated and elevated in the right way. So I definitely recommend going through local authorities, and definitely to central government, make sure you pick up on those things as well.
Well, and in some ways, I mean, I have no experience of government, obviously, before July last year. But it is quite incredible in a way that this stuff wasn't happening before. You know, I think the intervention we've made in Cambridge, Joe's been central to that, but getting in to unblock and problem solve and deal with issues like the water capacity constraints issues, I mean, it has worked and it is unlocking homes. So these things can be done. And I suppose the sort of frustration is that we haven't done it to date, and we're only over the last 10 months starting to get moving and working this way. But the results, I think, sort of speak for themselves. There's 10,000 units there, homes that are now unblocked and can proceed, that previously, you know, were tied up.
Yeah. And it was signalled, don't go too much politics, it was signalled in the last government, Harrington review from 2 or 3 years. I just saw him yesterday at breakfast, and people saying to me, what should we do? How can we make things better? Well, could you just implement the Harrington review from 3 or 4 years ago, which was talking about that cross connectivity in government to drive FDI? So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We should have another look at that. We're going to have to look at a finance work stream to sort out some of the scale-up issues across the corridor, actually the wider UK. But there were good ideas. This wasn't seen to be the momentum at the time to get them embedded into government, so we should look at that again. More questions from the floor? Ben.
Thank you. Right, so it's another question for Matt. I'm
Always happens, all right.
from the Planner magazine, and Anglian Water told us that they're expecting around 250% rise in planning applications to the local planning authority over the next 5 years. So what can we expect to help local authorities deal with the massive growth in the region?
I suppose there's 2 points there, and I suppose to just speak again to some of the constraints that we're dealing with. Water's a good example in Cambridge. There's lots that DEFRA are doing through the UKREiiF review, through joint work with us. We're looking at things about how we more efficiently use water. We've obviously got to take action in all these areas, and government is coming together to solve some of those problems. In terms of local planning authority capacity, which was a major theme of a breakfast roundtable I've done this morning and is asked me wherever I go, we absolutely recognise the challenge there. You know, local planning authorities have been starved of resource, but have really struggled to attract the talent and skills they need, and we are asking a lot of them. But I would just point everyone in this room to the actions we've taken over 10 months, and again, I really appreciate the need for speed, but 10 months in government time is not that long, and we have done a huge amount. So it's very constrained fiscal circumstances, obviously, but the Chancellor allocated £46 million to help local planning authority capacity and capability at the budget. We've taken through secondary legislation to allow local authorities to increase planning application fees, householder fees and others. And really importantly, through the planning infrastructure bill, we're allowing local planning authorities to set their own fees at a rate that will cover their costs, and we're ensuring they're localised and can't be used to subsidise other services. And I think through those reforms coming forward and the wider support that the department provides, we will see a step change, and we will help local planning authorities to deal with the number of applications that I'm glad you agree are coming forward in huge numbers over the coming months.
Now, the scientist in me is coming out again. We can't just keep doing planning. It's brilliant to have you to hear. We'll come back. I'm sure we're going to come back to this. I will open the floor to questions again. I'm going to come back to universities. So, Karen, I think there was a time where we were on the edge, and it's great that we met and pulled it together again. But we shouldn't underestimate the role of the ARC university groups in keeping us all together over the years.
Yes.
So one thanks to that. I think Alistair may be in the room, but it's his last. It's almost his last day. Alan Lomax and Alistair Fitt both kept us going for the longest time when we might not have been going. And guess, Karen, what I'm coming back to actually is the critical roles of the universities in the ARC. We know both Oxford and Cambridge are creating more innovation and more opportunities than they can possibly pursue. And one of the things is, how do we ensure they burst out in the right way? One, they can burst out in Oxford and Cambridge. Hopefully they can burst out across the rest of the ARC, and they need to be bursting across the wider UK. And if it's come straight from the Manchester-Cambridge alliance discussion that's going on elsewhere. So it can't just be an Oxcam issue. We've then got the strengths you've described in the middle, but also we've got the teaching universities as well. So universities are critical to the success of this corridor. What more could we be doing in a fiscally constrained environment to support our universities?
Well, yes, a fiscally constrained environment, right, but universities are naturally collaborative. And I think that the key word here, which I've heard from a lot of people, is partnership. Oh, Can you not hear?
No, we can a bit. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So the key word that I've heard here is partnership. And one of the things that struck me when we had the launch of the Oxford-Cambridge Growth Corridor, and Peter Kyle said, I want to work in partnership with you. And I think, the Arc Universities Group has been the glue that has kept all this partnership going. We've worked through thick and thin, even before my time at Cranfield, to keep this partnership going because we are naturally collaborative, because we work together. And yes, you can expect more of universities because this is what we do. We work together. Our brilliant academics are creating this growth in quantum computing, in advanced manufacturing, in smart logistics. So we will keep doing that. But the ambition to work in partnership together across the region to make sure that all of the universities have a contribution, and they do have a contribution, I should say. We're very different universities. We're not like any other university partnership. Cranfield is also part of the Midlands Innovation Partnership, which is solely the universities that are driving innovation. But this partnership is completely different. We recognise that each of the universities has its own strength and has a contribution to make in the region. And don't forget, most universities were created for their region to satisfy a civic mission, to satisfy a local need, and that is very well recognised across the whole universities. And yes, we've got the two world leading universities at the end. We've got Cranfield, which is a global leader as well, and then you've got a range of universities all doing what they are good at and contributing to the greater good of the region. We're all committed to the region, absolutely committed to the region. And the skills work stream that we've got with the Arc University is really vital because we need a range of skills. We need the higher level skills at PhD. I would say we need level 7 apprenticeships, but that's probably too controversial for today. But there's a range of skills that we need across the region, and we're driving that whole range of skills.
Yeah,
and of course, the working with companies comes naturally to a lot of us.
Gareth, you want to come in?
Yeah, I just want to kind of build on what Karen was saying about how. So there's a model that we've used, and I'm sorry to talk about London in an Oxcam Growth Corridor session, but there's a model that we've used 3 times across London with 2 universities and with the Research Institute. So we have these memorandums of understanding with the Francis Crick, with UCL and with King's. And they're primarily about access to people, events and equipment. And the reason that we think they're important, because the overused word sort of ecosystem is way more important in supporting the business journey of a science and tech occupier than it is a more conventional sort of sector within the economy. And we think that there's, one of the key missing pieces there is that approach to partnership with the right institutes to help that access to people and events and equipment, whether that is getting ideas out of universities into into startups, those startups having space to be able to scale up, or being able to design experiments in the right way for a business that is doing its research. They want access to experts, the Crick, to be able to talk about the design of those experiments. So there's a model that we would like to roll out through the Oxcam Growth Corridor at the right time with the right partners to help support that sort of business journey. But that's very much sort of like how we see that sort of partnership working in practice from a real estate perspective.
That's really interesting. And just a quick call out for ARU in Peterborough, which was set up quite recently and actually is still being supported by government. And that's exactly like, how do you partner with business at an early stage so you're providing the skills that we need? And I'm sure you're already on the cases, what on earth are we going to do about Universal and the vast number of roles they're going to need? I know when they've done sites in other countries, they've basically just affected the curriculum and set up their own curriculum within schools, which is like a scary thing that we've probably never done in the UK before. But that's how do you solve the problem? How do we make sure we are providing the skills? And actually having the Arc University Group as a solid and continuous link across the Arc. And just so you know, our Arc's not geographically constrained. So Hertfordshire's in our Arc because, one, they have Stevenage, we want GSK in Airspace, and Patrick Ast as well. And the University of Hertfordshire in as well. We have University of Northamptonshire, we have University of Buckinghamshire, despite the fact Buckinghamshire themselves aren't as wild on the region. So it's really an economic corridor. And as a science and technology organisation, the Supercluster Board doesn't really see itself as a geographically constrained. We have some strong links to Manchester, Liverpool. We've been looking at the Northern Art proposals, things going on in Bristol. And I know a lot of the investors who invest, I'm sure you invest outside of Oxford Arc as well, don't you, Gareth? It's like, this isn't a zero-sum game. It's not like Oxford, Cambridge or nowhere. It's how do we catalyse and ensure that what goes in Oxford and Cambridge, one is we realise that potential, but secondly, how do we make sure it applies across the whole of the UK and brings benefits? And a plug for our Superpower conference, which there's no point plugging it because it's sold out. But at that conference, we've got leaders from Strathclyde, from Manchester, and then we've also gone global. So we have representatives from Station F in Paris, New York, Boston. So this idea, again, I'll come back to, I'm a scientist, the scientific opportunity in this growth corridor is globally competitive, and we will create a cluster which is competitive in the globe. But that doesn't mean we're not talking to anybody else in the UK, and we need to be talking to people across the globe if we're going to solve some of these truly global challenges. I'm feeling much better now I've done some science, so I'll return to questions from the audience, probably for the Minister. Any got any more questions? There's a special
Andy,
prize for someone who does want to
Can I
the
just
Minister.
add one
Yes, you can,
thing
yeah.
to the previous answer? It's just, I mean, we don't talk about it enough, but the other kind of partnership between the university sector and indeed local government and businesses is on land. The universities own a lot of land, right? And it's in very important and strategic places for growth. So just sort of putting down the gauntlet at that challenge as well. I mean, I think that is something that
That's spooky, because I had that conversation with someone last week. I'll talk.
And
I'll talk to you without the microphones, and then
Can I
Karen will
add to
tell you
that?
the-
So
No, go on.
Cranfield University, for instance, 640 acres on our Bedford site, and we have an airport. Not many vice chancellors run an airport.
exactly.
I think what I'm about to say adds on to exactly what you're saying. So Oxford and Cambridge are really well known, bordering on saturated insofar as they can't cope with planning and what have you. But the Ark's huge. You've only got to look at that map. And
Yeah.
as you say, it's Bedford and it's you guys. We work with the University of Hearts. Stevenage are really up for change and growth. Is there a quick win, does Planning think, that actually, not ignoring the two ends, but is there something we can do in the middle to actually kick this off in earnest outside of the two nodes?
Who wants to answer that? I could answer that, but I'm not going to. Cav, have a go at answering that.
So,
But you're right.
Absolutely. And starting towards the end of this year, early next year, East West Rail will be running its first services from Oxford through to Bletchley and Milton Keynes. The government is challenging services to open all the way to Bedford as early as possible, sort of 2030. The big bit is where you've got to buy the land and build a brand new railway, which will take a bit longer. So I think unlocking that is going to be sort of really important. I think Milton Keynes has some really big ambitions, and I think it is how we sort of come together and unlock that, and that is about place connectivity, high quality place. And I know there are lots of sort of ideas at the moment floating around how to make the most of that, and as the Minister said, the sooner we can crack on with that, the better.
Oh, what I would say is don't underestimate the time it takes to do that. So, so in a previous world, I moved AstraZeneca into Cambridge. That was quite a big job. Lots of people came into Cambridge at that time and said, "What's the Cambridge narrative? You know, why is it such a?" Nobody knew, and actually that was the trigger for creating the narrative, which ended up with a lot of the activities we have around Cambridge and the promotion, and the way that eventually we ended up with Peter Freeman, because we got better. And this work that we did, non-ONS analysis of the growth, it takes a bit of a while. I think I'm seeing good seeds of exactly the same things. Definitely Oxford's just needs pulling together, frankly. The middle region needs a bit more pulling together. So actually developing that common narrative. I talked to Pete Marland in Milton Keynes as well, talk up to Pim up in Silverstone. There is a strong narrative. We were talking about at dinner last night. It's just pulling it together and making sure everyone knows what it is and where it is. Authenticity of the strengths of your region is really important, and that's something I'll be talking in some of the other sessions about. But yeah, absolutely spot on. There is no point to this if it just ends up being Oxford and Cambridge, because they will kind of be successful. We can just relay some of those constraints, but it doesn't answer the bigger question: is how do we get that globally competitive supercluster across the wider region? Neither Oxford and Cambridge on its own, controversially, if you're from Oxford and Cambridge, to a big organisation isn't enough. We haven't got the critical mass. The critical mass comes from joining it up. The bonus of bringing in the stuff in the middle is huge. That's the undiscovered opportunity. That's what investors should be looking at. The stuff in the middle is the thing which will be released by bringing it all together. We use Ox and Cam because they're the globally recognised brands. Make no two bones about it. You put money into Oxford and Cambridge, you're going to make some money. In the future, but that's very constrained, and it's all tightly held land as well. The bit in the middle is the exciting bit.
I will slightly. I agree with you, but to slightly push
That's
back.
being provocative.
Oxford and Cambridge are constrained. They are saturated as things stand.
Yeah.
And what we are going to do is to change that picture. I mean, that is. So you're absolutely right about the opportunities in the middle, which are significant. But we also have to. We have to ensure that. And I say to all investors in the room, yes, I think there are opportunities, and we'll flesh out the detail in due course, so you have a clear idea about what are the investable propositions in the middle, but it is absolutely both in the short term to unlock growth in Oxford and Cambridge, but in the longer term to ensure that across a wider spatial area in both of those cities, we're doing really good planned growth, long-term investment that really drives benefits over decades, and it will. So they are constrained. It's just to say that is the fundamental challenge we're going to deal with, because there is a scenario where we say, let's concentrate on the middle. Oxford and Cambridge will do okay. Bit of piecemeal development here and there. That is not what we. Just to be really clear, that is not what. And we want investment in the poles and in the middle.
And that's not what I mean. What I'm guessing, Matthew, is it's more that I know the IP coming out of Cambridge. It has the number one per capita number of publications in the world. It is number one in the world for the number of scientific publications it's got. If we release the potential of Cambridge, it explodes not just through the whole of Cambridge. And absolutely right, a lot of that needs to go. I guess what I'm saying is opportunities within the wider region, because I'm a scientist, and that's that collaboration, but also for the wider UK, the benefit, the whole of the UK. Unconstraining Cambridge has benefits everywhere, and the work you've done so far has been fantastic. And I talk a lot with Peter Freeman about what is happening there. But let's make
and that's
sure.
Why we've been really. That's why I've been really clear, and I think you'll get to. I think in themselves, for example, the 10 million the Chancellor allocated to Cambridge, where we're moving the growth company. These are hopefully really good, strong signals as to our intent. There will be more that come forward, but I think that is the crux of it. We want local leaders, local partners on side. But ultimately, this is nationally significant growth, and government is going to stand behind it in a serious way.
And hopefully, and Gareth's still here, and leveraging vast amounts of private equity into that as well. It can't just be the government working on their own. We need to be doing this in partnership. Every pound, as I said about East West Rail, if you're spending $1 billion on East West Rail, we need to at least give you tenfold back, preferably way more than tenfold back in a fairly reasonable time frame. Because that's quite the huge commitment from central government to this area. We've got to pay back, as most of us here, private sector. We owe it to the country to make sure we maximise the benefits of the investment that you're making in this region.
And I think we will. And as soon as there is a clear line of sight to some of those changes, like East West Rail, I think the amount of investment that will be unlocked will be enormous, because there's lots of money going. Whether it's post-Trump and the approach to tariffs, and whether there's money that was going to be invested in the US that is now looking for a different home. I don't think there's any shortage of money out there looking for places to invest. So it's just a little bit of that certainty and line of sight to what that return is. Real estate is quite a long, slow game. So when people got line of sight, I've no doubt there'll be an absolute load of investment that will be forthcoming across the corridor for housing, for labs, for all sorts of things.
Yeah, and I've heard that echoed through day one as well. I think it's what people testing your calf. Is it really going to happen? Is it really going to happen? Because these are people making investments over 10, 15 years, and big investments within this region. And events like this really help solidify that it really is the case. And we can never say it enough. We just need to keep going on and on. There was a question at the back, which means I've lost control of the mic as well.
Thank you.
So behave.
Yes, Matthew Battle from UK Property Forums. It's a message for Gareth, actually, or a question, I'd say. It's not a message, it's a question. That's something else. You mentioned rather ominously that there was not robust occupier growth. What do you mean by that? Is that a short-term problem or a long-term problem? It seems to me that's a fundamental issue for the future growth of the region. Perhaps you could expand on that.
So when we look at levels of active occupational demand across Oxford, Cambridge and London for science and tech space, post-COVID, because of the amount of VC investment that went into all sorts of life sciences businesses during COVID, people forecast that would continue, and that would occur across other scientific disciplines too. And they thought that would result in a high level of active demand and a growing occupier base across the Golden Triangle. And I think if we're honest about it, that demand hasn't come through quite like people expected in terms of depth and scale and speed of decision making. Partly that's been affected by some of the the Liz Truss sort of mini budget effect on cost of money, which is a little bit of a shock. The cost of money is probably going to go up anyway. But that's kind of turned off some of the taps of funding that's affected the growth of some of those businesses. So we haven't seen that manifest itself as real estate demand coming from that business growth. We have got sort of green shoots of recovery, and there are some deals that have happened in the last probably 6-9 months, whether it's Novo in Oxford. We've done a deal with Arm in Cambridge. So there are some sort of positive signals that are out there. I would still like to see some high levels of active demand, and I'd like to see the decision making of the demand that is active to be a little bit more speedy because some of the decision making is very, very slow. The active demand tends to move quite slowly at the moment too. So I think it's a little bit thin and it's a little bit slow. It's okay, but we would just like it to be better. Our consensus forecast for it were for it to be a bit stronger than it actually is at the moment.
But the short, in a minute, Prashant. The short answer, I've been in this business 30 years, and the reality is it's cyclical. What really frustrates me is back in 2020, what the thing is, I wanted Peter's derived Cambridge Growth Company. 2 or 3 years ago, there was a shortfall of 1 million square foot of lab space in Cambridge. If we'd had that space, it would be full, and those companies would still be there. It's not like these companies are disappearing, it's just they're not taking on more space at the moment. So we need to find a way of managing space within a cyclical environment. So we're probably on the curve back up. I can give you some examples of organisations which are starting to raise more money, so some unlocking of the VC funding, which is some of the existing companies. I think our bigger challenge is scale-up funding, the £1 to £10 billion companies. That's the bee in my bonnet.
Yeah.
My company got sold at £1 billion when it could have been sold for, well, it would never be sold. It could have been an arm, it could have been 50 billion, it could have been 100 billion. It basically set the base for therapeutic antibodies in the whole world. 5 of the top 10 best-selling drugs in the world are protein therapeutics. Fortunately, the company that bought us was AstraZeneca, which meant that a lot of that value stayed within the UK. But many other companies of the unicorns in the UK have been sold off. So I'm more worried about that big side. I think what I was talking about at the beginning, which went back to the science, this is underpinned by the extraordinary innovation. That innovation hasn't gone away. In fact, it's accelerating. We've got Prashant at the back, will confirm this. The number of modalities, the different things beyond antibodies that came out of Cambridge is enormous now, and it's only growing. We've got cell and gene therapy. We're actually in a pretty good shape in the UK in cell and gene therapy. Could do a bit of a shake-up, but that's for a different conference. But the opportunities are all there. So what we've got to do, and I don't know, we need to work together on this. How do we ensure that the British Land of this world can put up lab space speculatively and be confident that it will get filled? And it takes visionary companies actually like British Land to do that. Other companies who are just going to build it incrementally one at a time are not going to meet the ups and downs of demand. And I don't know the answers. You guys are the ones with the money and taking the risk. But I'm extraordinarily confident the innovation will continue. For at least, back to your point, I think, yeah, absolutely. It's Oxford and Cambridge have the innovation. How do we maximise the value of that for UK PLC?
I think one way of hedging the demand, I don't know what Matt thinks, is doing more mixed development that is all partly resi, partly, commercial lab space, whatever. And we're seeing that already happening in Oxford with Begbrook development, for example.
Yeah, agree. Prashant, you get the last question before we start wrapping up.
Thank you. I can echo your point on modalities, whether it's PROTACs, antibody drug conjugates, peptides, a plethora of new innovation coming out.
So much better you saying those words, because this is about the science. You guys are going to help us get that science out there.
I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on how we tell the story of the supercluster to the whole world. As you know, Andy, we're working on the Cambridge Wide Open Week, which is about telling the story of Cambridge to a bigger audience, because we don't think we're doing enough to tell us the world about what exciting people, places and science is happening in Cambridge. But the supercluster, it's an even bigger play.
That's a great segue. I'm going to come back to Cav for that one, because we've thought about how do we... One of the reasons I'm so frustrated, me and Karen were, is it's such a fantastic story. So how are we going to promote this outside of our bubble, which is still a bit of a bubble, to be honest? How do we make sure we get that promotion out into the wider world?
It's a good question. I know that Minister Gustafson is very focused on this in terms of how we do that. As Patrick Valance says, there is a word for Oxford and a word for Cambridge in Chinese, so they sort of know the brand. And I think the brand is known. It's about the investment propositions and giving people confidence in that. And I know Minister Gustafson and her team are sort of thinking about how do we do more in that space. What is in the sort of the general, I used to work in marketing, what's the general brand building, but what's the real call to action and what's the sort of specific propositions? And that actually is more, government can promote, but we can't generate in that space. And we need the sort of support for what are the things and where are the opportunities to bring that money in. But both ministers are very focused on making sure that Britain is clearly open to business in this place, and when people want to find the right place, they know where to go. But a lot of it is owned locally. So someone gave me the example the other day when someone wanted to invest in Cambridge. Cambridge kind of worked out here are 3 or 4 places you could be. Oxford, admitted they weren't yet at that stage. And so when that sort of question comes, they're not quite ready in the same way. So our job is to support the places, but the vision is going to come locally for that space, the knowledge is going to come locally, and the planning decisions are going to sort of come locally. And so it's got to be on the front foot in those places so that when someone comes knock at the door saying, I've got a big chunk of money to invest, we know where to guide them and support them in that place. And ministers are absolutely sort of at the forefront of creating that momentum.
And a final advert for the Supercluster Board. Of course, the Supercluster Board has businesses with market capitalisation of about £1 trillion and investors with assets under management of £7.7 trillion. So you're welcome to come to us to ask how do we make sure we get that promotion to bring, including Gareth and Stanley from British Land. So we are here to help and support you with that discussion and that message, because actually a lot of us are the UK representatives of global organisations, and actually one of the hardest sells in the world, which you never know about, but we all know about, is selling things into our own global organisations. And actually the Oxcam story is very strong within our global organisations. And how we pitch that is probably quite similar to how you'll pitch it to other investors in wider regions. And the generosity of people like Gareth, I'm sure Gareth would help us bring in other investors.
Yep.
We don't see this as a zero-sum game. There's plenty of opportunity. There's plenty of people we can help with that narrative. So thanks for that. Anybody have any final comments? I am going to leave the final comment to the Minister. It's the advantage. The disadvantage of being a Minister, everyone asks you all the questions. The advantage is you get to do the summing up at the end. Anybody else have anything to sum up before we...
I'd like to say, I just remember that we're a very small country, and if, the distance between Oxford and Cambridge is not that far, and if this was America, we would be one very tiny region of America. So let's not think about, small regional differences, sub-region. Let's think about the UK and the Oxford-Cambridge growth corridor being the growth corridor that propels the UK, not the Oxford-Cambridge growth corridor, if you see what I mean. It's not about our region, it's about the UK.
Thanks so much. Final comments, Minister?
I suppose just very briefly, I think you can take confidence from the interventions we've already made, and I hope you've been reassured today from what I've said and others have said that we are deadly serious about this. But in fairly short order, more detail will be forthcoming, and at that point we just need everyone to row in behind in a really serious way.
So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for attending. I know everyone has another one at 11, which I thought we finished a couple of minutes early. But thanks to the Minister and thanks to all the panellists, which included the Minister in the end. Do come and talk to us. What I said at the beginning of my welcome yesterday was it's still a bit of a work in progress. We've got great stuff. We're here to problem solve. So let's get this sorted out over the next 2 to 3 days, and then let's go back and implement it. So thank you very much.